Jesus spoke Aramaic. That's now a dead language.
Right.
And so we had to transition from Aramaic to Latin. And he might have spoken Greek a little bit, but basically we went from Aramaic to Latin and then had to translate Latin to English. And that's being generous. If we've only made 2 steps, or even if it was just Greek to Latin to English, and even when you translate like one language to another, I know so much significance and meaning gets absolutely lost in the words, where certain words can have so much more value.
This episode of the Medicine Podcast is brought to you by Immune Intel AHCC. Immune Intel is the most clinically researched specialty immune supplement in the world. Anyone with an immune system can benefit from taking this thing. If you want to check it out, go to themedicine.com/products. Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. My name is Mimi, and I'm here with my love, my king, my partner in basically everything I do in life.
What is going on, everybody? We are so excited to be back, and we have a special guest today. We've got a friend that we've had in the space for some time now, and we've been sort of patiently waiting for the right topic and the right moment to bring Clayton on. But we've got today Clayton Cuteri. Welcome to the Medicine Podcast, my friend.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to see how you guys are energetically with each other, because I know it's one thing to like watch a podcast, but then whenever you're connected, let's say in that conversation, I'm always interested in seeing how these divine partnerships play off each other. So I'm excited just to talk to you guys. But thanks for having me on in general.
We're happy to have you. This is going to be fun. I might be biased, but I think our energy is our partnership is pretty divine.
And honestly, one of the things that has made our connection now in part 2 so interesting and fun and curious has been this opportunity to look back on our upbringing, the upbringing that was so deep into evangelical Christianity, with a level of interest into how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater? We have both left Christianity. I left it quite bitterly, middle fingers to the air. And it took me a while to even be able to look at that religion and try to find or highlight any pillars of deep wisdom and
redeeming
truth
qualities.
And redeeming qualities, if you will. But one of the things that found me sort of by happenstance, but was this beautiful bridge back to some of the deep truths of Christianity and what really sounds like some of the highlights of this Jesus character that everybody seems to like so much was the Gospel of Thomas. And this is why it's a perfect opportunity to talk to you, Clayton, because you have recently written a book called Revealing the Secret Teachings of Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas, where you deep dive the first 10 verses of the gospel. And that's what we're going to be getting into today, which I'm stoked about because it's beautiful. And it's been a few years since I've actually gone back and read any of the verses myself. So maybe to kick it off, would love to know what your history with religion was like, what your history and or relationship with Christianity was like, and then how it sort of led into this more mystical interest.
Yeah, certainly a beautiful spot to start. And I was brought up Presbyterian. So I was baptized Presbyterian. I was, what was it? I went through like Sunday school there. So it was like pre-K Presbyterian school. And then forget what it is. Is it communion? They call it communion whenever you become like confirmation. Yeah, there it is. Geez, that's how far away I've been from it. So I was confirmed Presbyterian, and everything was we kind of just like Sunday people. Like we showed up on Sunday, did the chanting, did the, praying, pray before bed kind of thing, pray over our meals. But our hearts definitely weren't in it, which I've come to find out is so powerful whenever it comes to these types of things, which maybe we'll get into a bit later, a little teaser for the audience. But I think the pivotal thing with the church with me came around 2010. And 2010 was whenever, politically speaking, there was a huge push with the gay rights movements to legalize gay marriage. And before we get into this, I want to make a caveat that I'm all for anybody getting married. I don't care what you identify as long as, it's a commitment between both parties, no one's forced into it. and you both care about each other. Like, and we can get into the nuances with marriage. I know there was a whole thing with you guys. And what I just saw is like, yeah, that's cool. Do it. But then whenever I saw that the Presbyterian Church, at least mine, I'm not sure if it was a wide Presbyterian thing, they decided to change the text in the Bible. It was always marriage was between a man and a woman, and they changed it to between two people. And it just was weird to me. It was like, this is our sacred text. We're allowed to go back and update it. Like, that's allowed. I was like, I thought this was something that was, proverbially set in stone. I thought this was like our thing. This was God's word, and now we're updating it. So something about that was like, what's going on here? And I remember reaching out to some people who I was confirmed with, and majority of them were like, oh, I'm cool with it. Oh, it doesn't matter to me. And to me, it just like was like this extra little, like, what is going on here? Now, through 2010 to 2020-ish, 2021, I was not like anything. I was probably, if I were to say something, agnostic, like, I don't know what's going on. I'm probably identified with the material world. Who knows? And then, I had this like whole like psilocybin therapy session that just unlocked me to the spiritual world. And so then for the last like 2.5-ish, 3 years, I've been just deep diving into that, especially with my podcast, which Chase was so graciously on. And I know we talked about Mimi, you'll be on in the future.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, what is going on in this space? Like, somebody talk to me. Like, okay, are there angels? Are there demons? Is the Akashic Records a thing? Like, who are we talking to? Was Jesus even a person? And through this evolution, there was the Gospel of Thomas came to me, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what's going on with this text? So I made a quick TikTok video about it, which went absolutely viral. I think it got over 2 million views.
Wow.
Which blew my mind. And it was just me like introducing the book, in which I was like, hey, I'm going to go through this line by line and tell people about it. 2 million views, 150,000 followers later. And I just, first of all, people who want to go viral, be careful what you wish for. Yeah. Because there was a lot of internal turmoil or an internal war that was occurring within me, of half the people saying that the Gospel of Thomas is absolute genius, and half the people saying that I am now a heretic and I am on a dark path to hell. So be very careful. Yeah. So that will put you in a very interesting place in life. And so, it wasn't until like, that was probably about a year ago. And now I was like a lot more serious about it. And I've been getting the downloads that I need to start writing this book. And from the second I started typing, like, everything just seemed to flow through me. The only thing I did was like reword a couple sentences after the first draft, reword a couple sentences and move around where things were placed. But generally speaking, I was in the flow of, what's it called? Like the flow. I guess it's just called the flow.
Yeah.
Creative flow.
Yeah, I was just in the flow with the entire thing, and that's what brought me to here. That's why we're talking.
I feel like, there's so many different directions we can take this conversation, but, when you were speaking to like, oh, our family went on Sundays, we prayed before meals, but it wasn't really like alive and on fire in our hearts. I feel like you described like 90% of religious people, whether they are Christian or Catholic or maybe Muslim or whatever. I feel like that is the majority of people. And certainly like in our upbringing, school, we went to a Christian school, certainly like in our church, even our families, it was mostly people who were just like, here's the to-do list, here's the checklist of the religion that we're a part of. And as long as we're doing these things, that means that we're on track, that we're good people. And for me, I'll speak for myself, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, and yours is too, yours as well, babe. But it's only like when I stepped out of Christianity, not in a hateful or bitter way, it was just more like, what do I actually believe? Like, what makes sense to me? And just kind of taking a zoomed out view and starting to ask some questions is when I actually noticed and really put my consciousness and awareness to like, hey, most people who say that they're a Christian or a Catholic or religious in some way, like, aren't even that nice of people.
Yeah.
They're not even following really what Jesus spoke about. They're not even like living true to the namesake of their religion. Like, what are we doing here?
Churchianity, I like to call it Churchianity, which is the difference between, the beauty and the mysticism that's embedded in the history of these ancient religions. And, for me, usually it takes some level of crisis, identity crisis, to start to push back a little bit. And we were like middle-class Americans growing up in the suburbs as white kids and having a pretty solid time. And it wasn't until I experienced my own identity crisis as an athlete. I was in college basketball player. My coach was an ordained minister. I was at a Presbyterian school. This guy was the biggest narcissist asshole ever. And for the first time, I'm starting to question, like, I'm unhappy. I'm unwell. This person's a narcissist. Abusive. How does this actually fall into the correct orientation of this thing called Christianity that everybody here is claiming to be the rules and the way that we orient ourselves in life? And that was kind of my first push out of it. Oddly enough, it was my Presbyterian education that required a study of ancient religion, history of Christianity, history of sociology, philosophy, psychology, that I got by the time I was a junior or senior. I was like, fuck this. This doesn't make any sense. There are contradictions everywhere. And so curious for you, you kind of mentioned you stepped into this, period of your life where you're like, dude, I don't know. I'm in this space of like, I just don't know. And that's the beautiful agnostic position. It's just like, I don't know. But there's a level of differentiation there where you can settle on just full-blown scientific materialism. This is all just a chemical experiment. Or I'm deeply curious. There's likely something more. What for you kind of positioned you into that space of just deep curiosity?
Well, what pushed me into deep curiosity was the psilocybin therapy session that we touched on briefly, where I had just come out of a relationship and it was a month and a half of pure bliss. Like, it was like we were exchanging telepathy of some sort. Like, I don't know, like it was just bizarre. And prior to this relationship, I was very logically minded, very, I was a computer engineer. So it was like 1 + 1 = 2. And there's no room for anything else in the world, very materialist. So to experience that, and that relationship felt like we knew each other for well over a year, like we had been seen, like it didn't make sense to me. And it crumbled because of just me stepping back into my logical minded nature. She asked me what we were, and the gears just started turning. It was like a cog in the machine. The flow was interrupted. And over the course of the next month, everything fell apart. That was when I came across like the psilocybin therapy. And it was crazy because you set your intention, then we meet up, and I walk into this girl's room, her apartment, and there's like crystals all over the place. There's tarot cards. And I'm just internally, I'm like laughing to myself. I'm like, Clayton, what the fuck did you get yourself into, man?
Yeah.
I was like, this is ridiculous.
Those experiences under your belt, you're not living.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's actually a very important point. And so I'm just like, dude, just go with it. Like, I had done psilocybin recreationally, but like, what if there's actually a divine way to use this? What if there's a integrated way to use this? So I was like, all right, like, let me just go through the motions, actually specifically how we're talking about here with Christianity. Let me go through the motions. I'll humor this chick. And over the course of the next 3 hours, I was absolutely mind blown how sexual trauma from my past was distorting my viewpoint of love, how that was related to my yellow solar plexus chakra, how all these cards she had pulled moments before basically highlighted that this is exactly what we were going to talk about, even down to a gemstone I picked, which was pyrite, which is aligned with the solar plexus chakra, which makes no sense to me whatsoever at the time. And I'm just like no clue what to do with it. Right. And that was really my first and probably prevalent dark night of the soul, which people talk about. I'm sure you guys have covered on your podcast, and just really blew me open of like, there's another dimension at play here. What is that dimension? And so that really set the groundwork of this just spiral into the unknown of just, let me see what's going on with feminine energy over here. Yeah. What's going on with being vulnerable? I know we talked about this whenever I had you on, Chase, but like, what does it mean to be a man and be vulnerable? And isn't vulnerability weakness? So like, am I being weak by being vulnerable? And realizing those aren't the same thing whatsoever. And so, Jen, that unlocked me into finding all of these different paths within the spiritual realm, if you will. And I know you guys even recently had on someone talking about like drumming and how like drumming can be a spiritual path. And what kind of happened with me is I tried all these different ones out. Channeling, I'm kind of blanking on what the other ones were, but channeling was probably the biggest one that I invested in for a little bit. And then I came across Autobiography of a Yogi with Paramahansa Yogananda, and something about it just resonated to my core. It was just like, this is my path, or what's called sadhana. This is my spiritual path. So over the last probably 6 months at this point, I've been consuming every single book that this dude has written. And mind you, historically, I don't really read more than like 1 or 2 books by an author. But this dude, I think I'm up to like 9 or 10 at this point, which is crazy. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but everything he says, my mind is just like, yeah, I know that's true. Yeah, I know that's true. Yeah, that makes sense. So I've even gone to the point of doing like his spiritual lessons, which I guess is technically like his organization. And I mean, throughout the entire thing, he's quoting Jesus, he's quoting the Bible. He's like, hey, like, you know, this is in Hinduism. We talk about this, and Jesus talked about this as well. So here's the connection. And so then I think that was like the missing piece to write this book, is having that understanding of like, where does it talk about in the Bible? Where does Jesus talk about in the Gospel of Thomas? And now that I have this missing piece that Paramahansa has brought into my life, it's like, oh, like this is how I can explain the mystical level using Jesus's words in the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah.
I love that. It's so fun when things start falling into place, and like not just falling, but like clicking into place, where you hear something, you read something, and you know immediately that this is true. Like it's not even like a convincing or a learning that's happening. It's like a remembering. I've had that so many times, especially in, you know, books like The Law of One, where it's like, I've never heard this before, but somehow I already know this to be true. And I feel like I'm remembering something rather than learning something new. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this more lately, and I'm not conclusive on this by any means, but, you know, we all generally have some orientation towards logical or more creative and mystical and intuitive, and what you want to call that, masculine or feminine. I don't really give a shit at this point. These verbs and words have become so saturated that it's like hard to even identify with any of them anymore. But there's groups who can read the music and or write the music, and then there's folks who can play it. And we're generally set up in one bucket or the other, maybe a little bit of both for the unique folks out there. And you go through life thinking that music is what's on the script. It's the keys that are written and articulated on this script. This is music. And others say, no, the music is the sound and the dance and the vibration. And most of the time, if you've done something like psychedelics and you're a little more logically oriented and you're convinced that music is what's on the sheet of paper, you experience the sound of the music for the first time and the vibration of the music. And you go, holy shit, there's so much more to music.
You are the music.
You are the music. And on the other side, you typically, you know, the people who are super artistic, they're nature children, they're less grounded and logical and top to bottom, left to right. And then if they decide to lean into something, maybe it's books, maybe it's a system, maybe it's a specific articulation or protocol that defines and rationalizes these very mystical things that they've been feeling and thinking, they can start to go, oh my God, there's actually a system to this. There's a code to this. There's a frequency to this. And again, it's this marriage between the two. I think psychedelics help so many of us who've been stuck in this really logical way of thinking. Our psilocybin especially, it's a very feminine experience. It really supports people who've been just gridded into a system and have to really shatter that system in order to experience what it's like outside of the matrix reality. But I think what's underaddressed is that sort of code or logic that can be written and articulated for those who are a little bit more mystical. And so I love that experience for you, Clayton. It's so similar to my own. Having years into scientific materialism and or just kind of an agnostic approach be completely shattered with the interjection of magic mushrooms. But I definitely want to get into the Gospel of Thomas, and before we do, I've got some of the excerpts from some of the verses that I definitely want to pick your brain on and get your thoughts on. But I think we should lay a foundation a little bit, assuming that most maybe haven't heard of the text, and maybe don't even know about some of the key components to just the Bible at large that you spell out in the book. And so let's lay a little bit of the foundation, which would be awesome. What is the Gospel of Thomas? Where did it come from? Who is Thomas?
Yeah, it's all great questions, and I'll jump into kind of like the timeline that I have found. And I know with numbers it gets a little messy, so I'm perfecting this still. So give me some feedback if the numbers get messy. But where all of this starts is with, of course, the birth of Jesus Christ. And something I found interesting is that I always just assumed Jesus was born at 0. Like we always just pinned it at 0. But in actuality, he was born between 4 and 6 BC, which then places his crucifixion around 26-28 AD, which, you want to talk about the first time your mind gets blown. It's like, oh, well, we're just starting off pretty strong here. So after Jesus is crucified, over the next kind of 100 to 200 years, small sects of pre-modern Christianity popped up. This would be like where the Gnostics originally started being formed. And what people were doing were taking texts. Well, they're starting to write the text, but then also B, figuring out which text they wanted to include in their own belief system, right? So like this would be like, is the Gospel of Mary in this? Is the Book of Enoch a part of this? What about, then the ones that we have in the Bible, Mark, Luke, John, like, are we going to read these ones? Are these included? So over the next, from Jesus's death or crucifixion and resurrection, if you will, in 28 AD, we now have these small sects of pre-modern Christianity popping up for the next 200-300 years. And it wasn't until like the late 300s whenever councils started merging, right? So you have all these small sects of Christianity, and then the bishops, or I don't even know if they'd be called bishops at this point, but basically the higher ups within each church were like, hey, we should all just come together and agree upon a set rule of books to teach people.
Yeah, they're basically like cult leaders, really. Like,
yeah,
at that point in time, these are like cult leaders, mystic cult leaders.
Sure. And I mean, this time period is riddled with people who want power. We want money and power. I mean, and we still have a little bit of that in here today, but I think, as we know, if we take a step back from the timeline as a whole and Earth as a whole, we're moving into, the age of Aquarius. There's more love, more compassion that's going to be happening on Earth. So 2,000 years ago, it was a lot more power hungry than what we're seeing today. But nonetheless, so that element of power and control is at play here. So what happened is all of these cult leaders, if you want to call them that, came together and said, hey, like, we're teaching this book, you're teaching that book. Should we agree? Let's merge. And they claim that it was unilaterally decided, but I'm sure whoever had the biggest following probably had more of a say in which books were included. So then it wasn't till around, I think, like 400 AD. I know 400 AD was when the Vulgate was written. So in Latin, this was the first time that we had the Old Testament and New Testament brought together, which, as a fun fact, the Vulgate wasn't accepted into Catholicism until like, I think 1516 AD. So even that it was still getting updated until the 1500s. But even taking a step back, right? So now we have the 400s, and around this time period was when massive book burning was occurring. So the reason I bring this up is because when it comes to the Gospel of Thomas, people are like, oh, this was likely written in 300 to 400 AD, which makes sense because they're written in Coptic, which wasn't around till 325 AD. So but there's also evidence that this was like a translated text, like by the way that the writing was, there's like insertions in the margins, the whole bunch of different reasons. So there's high evidence that it was actually translated from an older text. Where it gets even more interesting is if we look at in the Library of Alexandria, we have what was the attempt to be the biggest collection of all original documents. So whenever ships would actually come into port in Alexandria, the protocol is you hand over all of your documents, we'll make a copy, and then we're going to give you the copy in return. You don't get to take the original back with you. So why this is important is that Alexandria housed all of the original documents of some of the most important texts in history. And where the tragedy falls is A, in the fall of a Library of Alexandria, but also B, in the massive amounts of book burning that occurred between, I mean, it still happens today, but primarily between 300 and 600 AD, with Christianity coming around. They were like, okay, any texts of Jesus that don't agree, we're going to burn those along with the people who are following these texts at stakes. So let's get rid of them. And then on top of that, you have the Muslim conquest that came in. So first of all, if the Gospel of Thomas made it out of the burning of whenever modern day when Christianity was forming, it would have likely been absolutely destroyed by the time the Muslims came around, because their whole premise is if it disagrees with the Quran, then it's, blasphemous. And if it agrees with the Quran, then it's not needed. So essentially, they were just torch everything in sight that wasn't the Quran. So as just a quick overview of all of this, Jesus is born 4 BC, crucified 28 AD. Around 100 to 200, the Gospels are being written and transcribed. From 100 to about 300 AD, we're having the popping up of pre-modern Christianity, different sects, different versions of it. Then we have the councils coming together. We have all this book burning occurring. We have councils come together, say what we agree upon. And then leaders within the Roman Empire were like, okay, let's burn all the texts that disagree with Christianity. Yeah. And then fast forward to 1945, which was when the Gospel of Thomas was found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, which is kind of like in the middle of Egypt. It's a little town along the Nile. And so that's kind of the timeline that we're working here with whenever we distill this information. And as a caveat, I know that there are some disagreements within, let's say, modern theology in regards to why this is not a valid text. But personally, I'm completely okay being wrong about any of the reasons that theologically, historically, it's not right. But if we sit down and actually evaluate the words that are being said here from a lens of wisdom, which is a whole nother thing to get into, we can see that there is profound wisdom and divine knowledge that is within this text. So it only makes sense that Jesus would have said these things. But even if he didn't, this has the hand of God layered all over it.
Yeah. No, I completely align with you in that sense for sure. And even if you look at what's considered canon in Christianity, it's just, and I'm not a theologian by any means or a historian by any means, but a general look into its history, and that's how I ultimately decided to leave Christianity, was that this has a lot of gaps, and this has had a lot of hands in the cookie jar, and this went through hundreds of years post Christ to come to a working model of what we call the Bible. And it included a ton of interventions politically, also socially. I mean, essentially, Christ, whether he was real or not, but his idea prompted this uprising of a specific type of Jewish individual or community that was frustrated by the Hebrew tradition and frustrated by Rome's influence, so much so that it gained kind of widespread power depending on Christian group A to Christian group Z. All of them had their particular flavor depending on what region they were in, what oppressions they were under, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you're talking about is this consolidation of a relatively consistent idea that this Jesus character who spoke of radical reformation could be the guiding light towards stepping into a new way of being, both spiritually, but also, politically and socially. And it got to be so significant and so large that it was institutionalized ultimately by Rome, and thus the systemization of what it means to be Catholic. And from that point in time, if you take a look at any of that, and even if you're just listening to the words that I'm saying, if you grew up Christian, it's kind of mind blowing because you never study it, you never learn that, and you go, whoa, how is this the direct words of God? It sounds like there's a lot of human beings in the cookie jar here. And so you have to get to the point where you're looking at the thing behind the thing, the high level themes, the meaning, the interpretations that can be felt and embodied in life. And I think that's where the Gospel of Thomas comes to be quite interesting. And then you match it with, which you go into in the book, and so I'll leave a little bit to be learned there, but it kind of like mirrors this burning of the books idea, this destruction of any sort of non-institutionalized description of what religion and what Christianity is going to be. So it would make sense that it was significantly hard to find, that it was buried in a cave amongst other very mystical versions that seem to be almost cousins to this Christianity that we know today, the Book of Enoch and some of these others that are just wild. And so it starts to make a little more sense. And whether or not it's the literal breath of God the Father, or however you want to define that, this can be considered, this can be looked at. And what makes this really interesting and unique is that it has a lot of parallels with the Gospels as we know them today in Christianity. I think there's 114 quotations from Jesus, and some of them are word for word the same as what shows up in the Gospels of the Bible. Yeah. Why do you think that there's similarities? And then why do you think that there were differences? Let's say this was on the cutting floor of the compilation of the Christian Bible, and the Gospel of Thomas, which shares all these similarities with other Gospels, was sitting there. What do you think was the deciding reason to leave some out, but leave some in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And right before I answer that, I even want to add to how you're talking about like this mismatch and, people changing the Bible. It's like, Jesus spoke Aramaic, and that's now a dead language.
Right.
And so we had to transition from Aramaic to Latin, and he might have spoken Greek a little bit. So there could have been some Greek in there, but basically we went from Aramaic to Latin and then had to translate Latin to English. And that's being generous. If we've only made 2 steps, or even if it was just Greek to Latin to English, like that's being generous. And even when you translate like one language to another, I know so much significance and meaning gets absolutely lost in the words, where certain words can have so much more value. And I kind of break down that a little bit in the book. But that's just a good thing to highlight there. But getting back to your question, right? Why did this happen essentially, or why did this one get cut off the chopping block? So this is where it kind of gets a little interesting. And this is where we got to bring in Paramahansa Yogananda. So one of the things that he teaches is that there's multiple ways to pursue God, which I found just fascinating. And it's like, what does that mean? I thought Jesus was the only way to pursue God. There's no way else. Well, the fact of the matter is, and it seems to be the more I align with this, the more evidence or self-true it seems to hold, which is that there are 10 manifestations of God. And by manifestations, I mean like the way that he appears in the world. So the way that he appears, the 10 ways, would be like calmness, bliss, joy, peace, light, sound, or vibration, which is also seen as the Holy Ghost in Christianity, wisdom, devotion, and there's 2 more that are escaping my mind. Oh, intelligence is one of them. And I'm going to say, to find the last one, you got to go get the book. I'm forgetting off the top of my head.
Cliffhanger.
I read it yesterday, and I don't remember all 10, but I do remember being like, wow, this is to be meditated upon for sure.
Definitely. And it's kind of funny because sometimes I can nail all 10, but I guess right now I'm like, all right, cliffhanger time. But yeah, it's crazy because like I've noticed in my life, anecdotally, before we get into it, I'll pursue just like one of these things at a time, and it'll tend to open up the other ones in my periphery. So like if I try to just be as calm as possible, like that'll open up so much more. And even in Psalms 46:10, which I'm not very good at quoting the Bible, but this is one that I've remembered for sure because of this. Psalms 46:10 is be still and know that I am God.
Yep.
And it's literally talking about meditating and calmness. So like if you're super calm, you're in touch with one of God's manifestations here on earth. So where this comes back to the Gospel of Thomas, where this comes back to the Bible, is in the elements of wisdom and devotion. So the Bible and what the church puts forth is devotion. You have to devote yourself to Jesus. You have to devote yourself to the church. You have to devote yourself to God. And what's beautiful, and I guess grotesquely beautiful about this, is that they were able to warp that into, oh, are you questioning me? Are you questioning the words I'm putting forth? Oh, then you must not be devoted to God's word, because I'm the spokesperson for God. So who are you to say?
And if you think about where this is coming together at, it's being institutionalized. And so, of course, this devotion nature from these specifically chosen texts and or quite literally extracted verses is going to play into, what was considered the need at the time to institutionalize this with the state.
Exactly. It's like, I mean, you want people that are devoted to your cause. You don't want people that are thinking for themselves. I mean, yeah, you bring it to even a governmental level. You want to be devoted to your government. The conspiracy theorist in me is like, okay, they knew what they were doing. They chose the devotion element of God to get people in line and to be devoted. Or it's also possible that unconsciously, maybe they just saw God as devotion and said, hey, like, this is the only manifestation of God, so let's pursue him through devotion. The fact of the matter is, though, is that there's 9 other ones. And one of those other ones that we talked about was wisdom. And so this is where Gnosticism comes into play, where gnosis is a Greek word for knowledge or wisdom. And what Gnostics believe, and it's at this point for me, it's self-evidently fact, is that you can pursue God through wisdom, through knowing more, through informing yourself. You know, the old adage that ignorance is bliss. It's false. That is completely false. It's wisdom is bliss, which we now come back into another aspect of God, which is bliss. Bliss is another manifestation of God. And so we can see that wisdom is actually bliss. Like, the more you know, and this actually ties into one of his verses, verse number 2. Jesus said in Gospel of Thomas, verse 2, Jesus said, let the seeker keep seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be disturbed. When he is disturbed, he will be amazed. When he is amazed, he will be invincible to everything. And when he's invincible to everything, he will be at rest. So much to break down there. But the key here, right, is let him keep seeking until he finds. When he finds, he'll be disturbed. So when we say ignorance is bliss, that's where people stop. They're like, oh, if I didn't know that, I would have been like in bliss. But the reality is that if you can push back that disturbance, you can get to being amazed. Then you can get to being invincible. And then you'll be at rest. So now we have this reback connection to calmness and bliss that exists right here. And so I think that fully answered the question that you were going for there.
I definitely want to come back to that verse because I pulled it out as a conversation point today. And yeah, thank you for educating us and enlightening us on this process. And it's not to just completely dunk on Christianity and its history. It's just to lay the context and the foundation of what we're looking at today, which you just start doing the math on how many interpretations this has gone through, how many translations this has gone through, how many verses, how many hands, how many church buildings, how many states and institutions. And you start to go, it is irresponsible for me to take this thing literally, quite literally irresponsible for me. And so we have to now put on this, we're stepping into that path where it becomes uncomfortable, where we have to go, okay, I got to think deeply about this. And I can't throw this out altogether because there's some really deep wisdom embedded in this thing. I'm going to have to, use some feeling through this and some wisdom through this. And again, like the Gnostics, which were a part of this sort of Christian uprising at this time, had a slightly different view. They had this view that Christ was coming back essentially to enlighten everyone in the world that a trick has been played upon them, and that I think the Gnostic phrase is the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing you that he was God, and that they're essentially saying, what would if there is this energy called the devil or Satan in this human experience, what would he do? He would trick us all into thinking that he was God, and that the church itself is kind of the perfect vehicle to slip in behind, kind of like the Wizard of Oz. He's pulling the strings behind the curtain, but the devil is the one actually playing this trick on all of us. And obviously that does not bode well when you're compiling these various Christian ideas into one unified version that needs to be united with the state. So of course that gets left behind in this process. But like you mentioned, what also gets missed is this way to access and connect to God that has to do with wisdom and has to do with thinking outside of the box. Not to mention these other versions that Paramananda Yoga Mahanda or whatever the fuck his name is.
Paramahansa Yogananda.
I've read like all his books. I can't remember his name. And so like I love that you get into that in the book, and there's significantly more that we're probably skipping over. But an important context to lay here is that there were so many different ideas about how to connect with the divine light that is God, that were essentially left on the cutting room floor, that have, subsequently been found even quite recently as it pertains to 1940s or so, that give us another opportunity to take a look at what holistic Christianity and this Jesus figure could actually be saying. And the Gospel of Thomas, arguably one of the coolest ones to take a deeper dive at and to see what else is there. And so like what I went through and reading through the book is some of these really rad verses that probably have a bunch of layover to other mystical teachings and spiritual teachings. But I would love to I pulled 5 of them out. I'll just read them out loud, and then we can just jam on maybe your study into them, what resonated for you, what you're hearing from people in your community, and then just what comes up for us, because these are really cool versions of what comes out of this text that I want to encourage everybody to not only read Clayton's book, but get into the gospel itself. So I pulled out verse 2, and I think that's literally what we were just mentioning, where Jesus says, "Let the seeker keep seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be disturbed. When he is disturbed, he will be amazed. When he's amazed, he will be invincible to everything. And when he is invincible to everything, he will be at rest." That is Gospel Thomas, verse 2. So based on your study, and maybe you can jump in here too, what does this mean? How can we apply this practically? What comes up for any of us as we think about that?
Yeah, I want to definitely hear more from Clayton, but when you read this the first time, just a few minutes ago, what sparked in my mind was a conversation around freedom. And that's what I'm reading and what I'm hearing when it says, "And when he is invincible to everything, he will be at rest." I think of rest could almost be synonymous with free, right? Because we as people, this is very relevant right now in 2023 and everything that goes on in our world and world crises all, every other day. It's like, if we just like close our eyes to everything and we're just like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Or, don't tell me what's in it. I don't want to know the ingredients. Or like, no, just let me, stay on my path of ignorance. Like, I don't want to know. La, 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 la. You're never going to be truly free, because if you're not seeking the truth out of curiosity and a love for learning and a love for acquiring wisdom, you're never going to have all the cards on the table from which you can make an educated decision for yourself that supports your freedom. Otherwise, we are in the child archetype. We are wanting mommy and daddy government or mommy and daddy CDC or whoever, or real mommy and daddy to take care of us and tell us what to do. But I think to avoid that path, it does start with the individual wanting to seek and really step into their individualized adult, wise adult archetype. And from there, yes, you're going to find some things that are quite disturbing, but you can't get to the truth. You can't get to freedom until you step through that veil and really get all the cards out on the table. So like, that's the first thing that I think of. And I would love to hear, your thoughts if they're different there. But when I read, "He will be at rest," I think he will be free.
Yeah. I mean, Mimi, you illustrated the physical world interpretation of that verse perfectly. And this is kind of a caveat for the entire book, is that the way that Jesus spoke in parables is that you can interpret these things at a materialistic level, and then you can interpret them at a metaphysical level. And that's where I found the true nature of this, like, to be. And so even as you're talking about freedom, like, here's a scary thought, is that I don't even think that I'm truly free at this point. And it's like, well, what do you mean, Clayton? Like, you're living on your own, you've got your own podcast, you're doing all these things on your own, you're not free. And I'm like, no. What I mean by that is that there's an idea called Samskaras. So in terms of karma, right? We have karmic actions, we do things in our past lives, they carry over to this life. We could dive into that more if people aren't familiar with like reincarnation, but this all hinges on reincarnation being a thing. And so from our past lives, we create these grooves, or what are called samskaras, or these little grooves in our soul that essentially connect energies together. So like, I have been blessed to remember 4 of my past lives at this point, all of which have been horrendous, like just terrible things that have occurred or that I've done. And one of the most recent ones, let's talk about getting disturbed, right? Like, okay, let me break this down actually with a personal example, and this is going to work in the metaphysical. So I have had some sort of connection, like the universe has been poking me through dreams, through things that I've seen outside myself, that there's a connection between me, between money and sexuality. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me, right? You get into this field, like I got into the field. Okay, something had to have happened in my past. Oh, okay, sexual trauma in my past. That's what led to this breakup. You get to a point in your journey where you realize that it can't be anything from this life that could have created these samskaras, these grooves in your life. So for me, and this is actually a medicine podcast exclusive, I haven't talked about this publicly before, is that what I found is that in the Roman Empire, and so this is kind of funny, we're even still talking about it, in the Roman Empire, I lived a life as a brothel owner. So every day I was extremely financially successful. Luckily I was treating my employees very well. But I was surrounded by sex 24/7, surrounded by sex, and I was making money in regards to running a brothel. So the energetic samskara I had was this connection between money and sex. And that, I mean, first of all, was very disturbing to think, how could I be a brothel owner? And, there's a whole bunch of different layers that come into it. But bringing it back to the verse, right? I was seeking. Why is there a connection between sex and money? When he finds, he will be disturbed. I was kind of disturbed to find out that I was a brothel owner in a past life. And even sharing that, I know, takes a level of vulnerability because people could very easily judge you for past mistakes. Cancel culture is terrible for all these reasons. And luckily, and maybe that's a lucky thing we have in regards to the forgetful veil that happens with reincarnation, is that we don't have to hold ourselves so deeply accountable to those things. But moving forward, when he is disturbed, he will be amazed. Like, even though I was disturbed that I was a brothel owner, I am amazed that this connection that happened, it was in Pompeii, by the way. So it was like right before the volcano erupted, which was a whole nother element of that. Yeah. Crazy fun fact. Actually, when I was in 9th grade, I took a trip to Pompeii and visited the same brothel that I owned in a past life. So that was, that was pretty trippy. That was like one of those things of like disturbed, amazed, but like in this quasi, like, really? So then, the next level, when he's amazed, he'll be invincible to everything. Now, in regards to this, like, I can see or like kind of energetically feel that this connection between money and sex has been like, it's like faded almost, kind of like a what's the Tinkerbell, like, that pixie dust she has, it just, there's like that fading that kind of has come with this. And so now it makes me invincible to realize I can take on bigger and better things. And so now that I can be invincible to things, I can find myself at rest. I'm not as energetically attached to sex or to money because those no longer have as strong as a samskara that is in my energetic field. It's been polished out. It's been, kind of worked over a little bit. And so this is kind of like where it gets to the mystical level of this, right? Investigate these individual nuances you're seeing in your life. Once you're ready for the answer, maybe you're not, tell your spirit guides that you are ready. And this could be a very practical thing for anyone listening. Tell your spirit guides, and, I'm ready to know, like, show me. And once you make that commitment, they'll show you, and likely it'll be a little bit disturbing, but that will get you to the next step of being amazed that this connection even exists within your energetic field, which then takes you to the next step of becoming invincible. Yeah. You grow more as a person. it's the old adage of like, people do bad things. Like, there's dark holes within all of us, but how do we holes? And the answer isn't to fill them, it's to grow bigger around them, to become more. Like, the blackness still exists, but let's become more than that darkness.
Thank you for sharing that example. We've had our own realizations from like past life regressions in the last couple years, and but I do want to say for the listener, you don't have to do past life regressions to come to these sorts of understandings about yourself. You can simply get quiet in yourself. If you want to be a seeker of your own inner world, that's somewhat simple and easy to do, where you can sit in stillness, take a few deep belly breaths, and you can use a simple question for self-reflection, like, what am I pretending not to know? And or what am I lying to myself about? Like, just sit with that for like 3 minutes, and you might be surprised at what comes through from your intuition. Even if you don't believe in spirit guides or God or whatever, like, just tune into your own feelings and intuition that's being generated from inside of you. That kind of seeking still has a lot of value on this path of self-development and evolution. I think that's something that we need to keep doing. And there's so many different flavors to this type of seeking.
This is the hero's journey. This is the pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic, as Mark Goffney would articulate it. This is where you see a call to adventure, and you become the seeker, and you step through the threshold. And although it starts out with butterflies and rainbows, you trickle into the territory that's somewhat uncomfortable. It's disturbing. You're out of your comfort zone, so much so that you slip down into the belly of the whale. You slip down into the dark night of the soul. There's millions of ways that it's been coined and articulated. It's seen through most successful stories. Only until you keep seeking, you keep asking, and you transcend what you thought was turmoil, and it's actually beautiful on the other side, and you've discovered or tasted the elixir of life, such that you can bring it back and be the gift to the world from what you've discovered. This is the transcendence of even relationships. You seek for a relationship, you become absolutely disturbed when you get to know yourself and the other person on an intimate level, and you can bail out at that point in time, or you can work through it and you can transcend it and come out on the other side in rest. And like, that's what's so rad, is this Gospel of Thomas is sitting on this wisdom that so many of us have experienced in our own lives, as well as having seen it play out through story and from some of the great philosophers and mystics that are at least in our current society, deemed pretty untouchable, like the Joseph Campbells of the world. And so I just love that the Gospel of Thomas has this just absolute juice sitting right there in just a little bit different language.
Yeah, man, I'm all on board, man. And that's the thing, is like, and that's what's really the beauty of Jesus's words and even the Gospel of Thomas, which is you come back to these things and you can see how Mimi, you were saying earlier, like, it just clicks in. You're like, oh, there's a deeper level to this. Like, I didn't see that the first time I read this. And I think I make a note in my book, but just even as a note, if you only read the actual Gospel of Thomas or the Bible or whatever, just go back and read it. Like, read it now, and then in 5 years, come back and read it again. Because having that life experience is what will like bring it back. And I always find it fascinating in regards to like material science, because I don't know at this point, I don't think that we'll ever get to a place where we can scientifically, like material scientifically, say God exists. But it's one of those things that is like, can be anecdotally proven. Like, the more people who find their path, the more people who pursue deeper meditation, who pursue wisdom, who pursue joy, who pursue intelligence, who pursue calmness or peace, or all of those things, will inevitably find it. And, that's going to tie back to verse 2. But it just seems to me very interesting that it's like a very individual basis, which I love. It's not a top down, it's a bottom up approach. It's like the individual needs to figure it out for themselves, and that's what's going to expose it to the whole.
Yeah, I love that. Yep. I'm going to jump to verse 5. Jesus said, understand what is right in front of your face, and all the secrets will be revealed to you. There is no secret that will not be revealed. So I'd love to hear your breakdown of verse 5.
I mean, we can simply use what I was just saying there, right? This connection between money and sex was just right in front of my face. And it takes that active approach of engaging with it. Like, it's one thing to become aware of it. Okay, I'm aware of money and there's a connection here between money and sex. Okay, so be it, whatever. You can turn away from it if you like, kind of your parallel in regards to a relationship. But there's a willingness, probably a fear that you need to overcome in order to actually engage with it. Ask yourself, as Mimi was putting, ask your spirit guides if that's what you have, but ask a higher power, your internal self, if you wish, what is this connection? I'm ready. Speak to it. Because that's a big thing. Even I've noticed this with my clients, is in this spirituality space, so many of us, and I was here at one point, are just like, okay, God will take care of it. My spirit guides will take care of it. And it's diluting our own internal power that we have within ourselves to actually interact with that thing that's beyond this material world. And so a part of our journey is actually like reclaiming our material power, if you will, to say, no, I'm co-creating this with God. God doesn't exist if I don't exist. Like, so we're in this co-creation together. So, okay, I'm ready now. Okay, God, show me that I'm seeing this pattern and that's right in front of my face. Show me what's deeper about it. And so that is kind of what shows itself. And then on top of that, it gets to the point where it says, there's no secret that will not be revealed. I mean, you come in contact with God, he'll show you everything. Because and this is, I think, where I know this is where Jesus was, and this is where like Bhagavan Krishna was, or any of these enlightened masters, which is aligned with what's called Christ consciousness. It was Jesus of Nazareth, and Christ was just a title that was best placed upon him for his level of consciousness, like the height of his consciousness. And anyone can sit here right now and be like, okay, I want to achieve Christ consciousness. That's great. But you've just set a really high standard. So all of these other things are going to need to unveil in front of you, and you're going to need to work for in order for you to get to that place of that level of consciousness. So it will be revealed to you at some time, but there's probably a whole bunch of other samskaras that you need to polish off in order for you to get to that next level, which might not be Christ consciousness. Like Paramahansa breaks it down as soul consciousness, then Christ consciousness, then cosmic consciousness, or God consciousness. And so it's this journey up, like, figure out what consciousness you're at, right? Are you at the ego? Are you at the soul? Okay, now how do you get to the next one? And just keep asking questions, understand what's right in front of your face. So like, we can look at this in terms of like this world being a mirror. And I think we all talk about this all the time, especially when you're in a divine partnership. That person sitting right beside you is a mirror for your imperfections that are a little bit less than your ultimate spark, right? Like your ultimate divinity, your ultimate soul level. And so you got to get really radical responsibility. You got to get really real with yourself about, why is this showing up in my life? What does this mean for me? Is this contributing to my growth? Is it harming it? Why do I keep seeing these connections? And I think this is what's great about the fact that I was a computer engineer, is that I was very good at pattern recognition. So being able to see patterns is huge. It's tremendous. I mean, you look at the structure of reality, it's all based on patterns. I mean, that's what geometric sacred geometry is. And so honestly, if you want to get better at pattern recognition, I've realized IQ tests, they're not really good for intelligence. They're more pattern recognition. So if you want to get better at pattern recognition, just Google free IQ test and take it 300 times. And what will occur is you start seeing the patterns. Once you see the patterns, you ask the question, and then I feel like I'm about to get back into verse 2 here. But once you pursue those questions, every secret of reality will be reviewed to you, which is a powerful thing.
Yeah. This makes me think of is, how our nose is in all of our sight. Mm-hmm. We just don't notice it because we look around it. The secrets are right in front of our face. So they're here all the time. And the way that we kind of reverse engineer to figure out what those secrets are is we have to ask ourselves, what am I afraid of? What makes me uncomfortable? To kind of reverse engineer our way into understanding what we're missing. And it's hitting on what Carl Jung talks about a lot, which is like, your biggest fear is your biggest task. It's what Joseph Campbell mentions, which is the cave you fear to enter the most holds the treasure that you seek. And we have this ability when it comes to fear and things that make us uncomfortable, even though it's in front of us all the time, we have this ability to see right through it and never notice it, because we're just like, I'm just going to set the table in the way that makes me the most comfortable and avoid the little shitty pieces that I don't want to look at every day. Yet those are the secrets. And no matter what you do, the more you avoid them, they'll accumulate. It's the monster under the bed. And the more you avoid them, inevitably they will reveal, they will manifest in your life, whether that be through some tragedy or turmoil, or maybe it's in your next incarnation or something along those lines. But we can't avoid these things, and we're equipped with a system to want to avoid them and see right through them.
Yeah, I think of the quote from Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So like the events of our life sometimes unfold based on our unconsciousness, and we think that it's just fate. But as we flip on the lights and truly want to seek and look for the secrets that are right in front of our face, like this can be interpreted on so many different levels, like spiritual, yes, relational, of course, like your partner being your mirror for understanding yourself on a deeper level, but then also practically in 2023 in the material world, these verses can really guide you in that way as well, and have a real like boots on the ground interpretation. Like, understand what is right in front of you. Follow the money trail. You're probably going to find some answers there. Look at the bottom of the paper at the conflicts of interest or who the paper is funded by. You're probably going to have some secrets revealed to you. Like, there is a way to reflect and to kind of interpret these verses in a way that's like practical in your life. But it's so fascinating that this is here for us to read and untangle and to supplement our spirituality with. And I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but most Christians probably have never read the Gospel of Thomas, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was, if you ask majority of Christians, they'll tell you that this was like the first heretic or the first heresy, which is to, this is taking Jesus's name in vain. These are blasphemous. I mean, I pointed it out, right? I experienced it with that TikTok thing. It's like, I'm going to hell. I'm a devil worshiper. One of my favorite comments was, I hope you have a plan whenever you get to hell because you'll need it. And I was just like, that's pretty funny. And there's always an interesting thing with like heaven and hell. I don't know if we want to break that down, but that's something I've even looked into super deeply in terms of like, what is heaven? What is hell? But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But
we addressed that with our interview with Bob Peck around kind of the lack of hell in the actual Bible itself, and where it kind of showed up historically. And it was more of like an Augustinian idea that was interjected into religion at that point. And I think in the Gospel of Thomas, but something that's actually has still in certain Bibles lived on, is this idea that the kingdom of heaven is amongst us, and it's here and it's within us. And I think it's in verse 3. Maybe I can pull that out right now. Jesus said, if those who lead you say to you, look, the kingdom of God is in the sky, then the birds of the sky will get there before you. If they say to you, it is in the waters, then the fish of the waters will get there before you. Instead, the kingdom of God is within you and all around you. Those who come to know themselves will find it. And when you come to know yourselves, you will see that you are the children of the living Father. But if you do not come to know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and that poverty is you.
Yep.
That's a heavy one, that last line.
And so I want to say it's in Luke. I think it's in Luke where originally it said the kingdom of heaven is within you. And it's been changed and altered. Like if you pulled a new, whatever they're called these days, NIV version, I think that's the one we had to use in Christian school. Yeah. But it says something along the lines of, hey, the kingdom of heaven is amongst you. But this idea that the kingdom of heaven is within you aligns a lot with mystical teachings, and can't help but wonder if the intention for heaven was quite literally a peace of mind, a state of being, a presence with which we can vibrate such that we experience heaven in the present moment.
Yeah, and before we jump into that, I do want to make a note that like in my book, I do make similar biblical references like at the end of each verse. So I looked at it for verse 3, and it would be Luke 17:20-21, Matt 24:23-38, and Mark 13:21-23. And I think, heaven and hell, it seems to me there's just so many ways to break this down. One of my favorite ways, scientifically speaking, is whenever it comes to our nervous system. So what do I mean by that? The way that I've seen it, this is like the idea that in every moment we're either getting closer to heaven or closer to hell. And I see it such that if our nervous system is activated, we're in that sympathetic activation state, the decisions we will make in that state will bring us closer to hell. And the decisions, if we can calm it, right? Because if we become calm, a manifestation of God, we are now in the parasympathetic and can now make choices out of calmness. We're not making them out of fear or anger or guilt or shame. We're calm and making decisions that bring us closer to heaven. Where it kind of gets to an esoteric level, a more mystical level, are the realms of existence that happen. And so for this, right, talking about the individual, let's do a little individual synopsis, right? So things that we can say are quote unquote real, right? Like we would say that this existence, this conversation is real. Okay, so we're going to label this as the physical world. This is our physical domain. You go to sleep. You have a dream. You are now in what I would call, it's a very real thing, right? Like you wake up sometimes whenever you get hurt and you can feel that pain. So what that is actually the astral world. And, this is astral projection, lucid dreaming. This is where it all falls into, is you're now encompassing the astral world. Where the third level comes in is the mental or causal realm of existence. And again, this is kind of how Paramahansa breaks it down, but I don't see any faults with it. So like in your dreams, you still have thoughts. Usually they come a little bit more instantaneously than you have here, but they still exist. And so what that means is, and this is kind of, I don't know if Gnostics get into this too much, but they believe at least that there's a divine spark of God that lives within all of us, which I agree with. So what happens is that divine spark exists, and that is then encased in a causal body, which is like the mind stuff or manas. And then that gets encased in an astral body, which is like dreaming, which then gets encased in our physical form that we have here, which is usually called the gross because it's the slowest vibratory state. But we could just call it the physical realm. So technically we have three bodies, physical, astral, and causal. And those are all animated by a divine spark, which is God. And then to bring this back to our gospel, our goal is to use wisdom in order to become so attuned with that divine spark that we become and merge our consciousness with God, becoming one with him.
I love that.
Instead of identifying, with the physical or the mental or the astral realms.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm curious as to why, and obviously this shares some similarity with what you would find in the modern day Bible, but maybe that was too complex to articulate in these verses, or maybe there's just that miss from the evolution of consciousness such that it was avoided altogether. But these are the types of conversations that we need to be having around heaven and hell, and less around the fact that you'll be in the pearly gates and living in pleasure for eternity after you ditch this meat suit, or if you don't, ask Jesus to forgive you every day, you're going to be lit on fire with gnawing teeth and spikes thrown into your body for the rest of eternity. Like that's where we're spending all of our time in Christianity, instead of this really beautiful scale of consciousness evolution.
Yeah, it makes me think of, one of our great teachers. I'm not sure if you know of Paul Chek. We talk about him all the time on this show. He talks about, people creating their own heaven and hell on this earth, on this planet, whether it's this incarnation or a previous one. We are literally contributing, like you said, making choices moving towards hell or making choices moving towards heaven. Certainly, like I don't want to sound like I'm making a grandiose statement or anything, but like there are certain times where I'm in bliss with Chase. Maybe we're watching a sunset or making love or whatever the thing is, and it's like I get it. It's like it's clicking into my psyche and my soul where it's like, this is heaven. Like we are contributing to our heaven experience. But you walk around and you observe, or you just, scroll 5 times on social media, and you see people creating their own hell on the flip side of this. And so, that's kind of the way that I think about heaven and hell. Is there an actual place in another realm that exists? Maybe, I don't know. I tend to think not, but we can be contributing to our heaven and our hell on earth through the decisions that we're making. And I will just say, we've said this before, but when you let go of the thought of a physical place that is hell under the earth somewhere, wherever that is, down there, your life opens up so much. It was almost like a sigh of relief that I could take once I was like, you know what? I don't believe in hell. I don't think that that's real. I think that was a group of people, a group of individuals, using fear to control another group of individuals. I think this is a human-made thing. It makes sense to me. And, I'm going to live my life in a way where I'm contributing to my heaven experience, not my hell experience, on earth. And anyways, there's my monologue.
And hell is as available as heaven is in a present moment, because all of us have been in those spaces where we're just sliding down the slippery slope of pessimism or skepticism or anxiety and fear. And we've gone into every depth of worst case scenario possible, and we seem that we can't stop. But those moments where time stops being vertical and turns horizontal, and it pauses for at least that moment, and you're experiencing the sun as if it's you, and you're experiencing your partner as if it's you, and that you're united with divinity. That's what we're talking about here. That's what we're talking about, about heaven and hell. And it's not that they're not real. It's just that the literal articulation of them, and the fear used for hell, and this sort of irrational pleasure leveraged for this idea of heaven, makes it really an anxiety process of having to walk through life with these two, like, what the hell's going to happen to me after I die type of idea. And so maybe trickling into maybe the last verse I'll pull out from the Gospel of Thomas, because it does mention heaven, is verse 6. And it says, Jesus says, "Do not lie, and do not do what you hate, for all things are known to heaven." And I like how simple this is. And it seems as if it could be taken quite literally, but maybe there's a more metaphysical idea behind it. What stands out for you? What, when you looked into this verse, really resonated?
Yeah, so you glanced over, I think, an important part, which is the first kind of part of that, where Jesus' disciples asked him, how should we fast? How should we pray? Should we give alms? Should we eat? And the reason I want to point this out as being important, because then Jesus is like, do not lie. So imagine someone's like, hey, how do we give alms? How do we fast? How do we do this? And Jesus is like, just don't lie. And so why this is important is it goes back to the beginning of our conversation in regards to the church. Okay, people are going to church, they're walking through the motions, but in essence, they're lying to themselves because they're not there with their whole heart. There's actually, it's a long story that it'll help, but I think we've identified the importance of it, where, if you're doing things you hate, right? Like, so it says, do not do what you hate, for all things are known to heaven. And I think this comes back to that divine spark that lives within all of us, right? There's this divine spark of God that lives within every single one of us. So that's how God is able to know whether or not you're on your path or not, because if you're on your path or not. Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. Go sit on your bed and ask yourself, what is something I know I should be doing that I'm not doing? Mm-hmm. And you'll have like a laundry list of things that will come to mind. If you're out of alignment, it'll feel like it never ends, but you just need to do that one thing. And this is where it comes back. There is no secret that will not be revealed, and all that is covered will be uncovered. It's because you know all the information. You have the wisdom within you. The key is just to become in alignment with it. And what happens is, and why he starts us off with do not lie, is because the problem is with lying is you warp yourself out of alignment with reality. we live in a time right now where it's like, oh, my truth is the absolute, or like the real truth, and subjective truth is a thing. And honestly, for a long time, I used to buy into that. I used to think like, oh, okay, like everyone has their own truth, like that's cool, whatever. But through my inquiries with people I've had on my podcast, it seems to me, and the best answer I've received from Asha Nayaswamy is she points out that truth is directional. So a good way to highlight this is like, think about somebody who is like a bum, sitting on their couch, not doing anything to progress their life. Maybe they're severely overweight, they're living in their parents' basement, and they then get like this divine inspiration. They ask themselves, right, what is something I'm not doing in my life that I should be doing? And they get this divine inspiration to go to the gym every day and become a lawyer. They, over the course of the next 4 years, they become absolutely ripped. They get a law degree and they become a lawyer, and they make a ton of money. Now, directionally, their truth is directionally true. They are now a better person. They are now closer to heaven. They are in less of a place of hell, energetically speaking. However, if we take that same thing, we look at someone like Jesus, and we say, and Jesus wakes up one morning, right before the crucifixion, and goes, you know what, guys, I'm not really the Son of God, and I'm actually divine to become a lawyer. So I'm going to take all this influence that I have to become a lawyer and make a lot of money. We all sit back and be like, Jesus, what are you doing? You're going the wrong direction. You're going backwards. So then it becomes fascinating of like how one person doing one thing can be true, and that for another, it's completely out of misalignment with the harmony of the universe or even God. And what that invites in is that the truth isn't subjective, it's directional. There are things that I need to do that some people might not need to do, like Chase might not need to do, or Mimi, you might not need to do. And there's things you guys need to do that I might not need to do. And there's different pillars that this appears in our lives, whether it's with relationships or money or creating things. And so we need to get really real with ourselves and stop lying, because you lie to other people. You're lying to that mirror that is you. And so you're not truly lying to them. You're lying to yourself. And what's really cool, if you guys want a superpower, here's it. And I accidentally figured this out. When you stop lying in every aspect of your life, and this includes to yourself about things you should be doing, and also as a caveat, not saying something is a lie. When you have something to say, it is a lie. So back to the superpower. When you get really honest and start telling the truth as much as possible, saying things when you know you need to say them, you start to figure out when other people are lying. And you know when other people are lying. And, there's a whole bunch of like caveats that come with this, but the crux of it is like, you just know, because you are now in a place of absolute alignment with truth and honesty that cannot be corrupted. And this is, just, it's kind of getting emotional, because I know how true that this is. That like, I'll tell people, someone will be like, hey, when you said this, it felt like this. And be like, oh no, that's not the case. They can't lie to me. I know that it's the saying, like, you can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to me. It's because I'm aligned with truth. I know what truth feels like. And I can tell that you're not telling the truth. So, and then there's an element of just like not pushing the envelope and just like let them go. But it doesn't really matter at that point, because what is the truth and what is a lie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude. Well put. It's funny. I have a really similar, like, mind-blowing idea, which is just tell the fucking truth. Mm-hmm. And you get these questions at the end of podcasts sometimes, which are like, if you had 5 words to tell the whole world, or put on a thing. And I'm always like, just be honest. Like, it's actually
just tell the truth.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's also easy. And it's going to be uncomfortable right now, but it's going to be significantly easier in the future when you tell the truth.
Yeah.
And God, one of the hardest things for me to do was to truthfully tell my family and my community that I don't believe in Christianity. And I'm talking years of discomfort and feeling exiled. But it has been the most empowering step that I've taken in my personal journey. And there's been aspects to it in our relationship, and been aspects to it in health and wellness as well. But it is such a step towards empowerment. Mm-hmm. And there's the lying to other people, but the lying to yourself is the one that's like hard to reverse engineer. And even so many of the things that we've talked about today in these excerpts from the verses they go together. And that avoidance of the thing that you're afraid of is living outside of truth. And for instance, I had chronic exercise addiction, food neuroses. And I was the last one to admit that this was just crippling my well-being, was that I over-exercised, was overly methodical about the way that I ate food. And I just avoided it at all costs. It wasn't until I was just actually able to step into the fact that it was like, man, I'm really fucked up here. Like, I'm really, really fucked up and not quite sure how to reorient this thing and reorganize this thing, that I actually fell in love with wellness and actually fell in love with fitness and food. And oddly enough, it was like, I was the last one to know, but these things are available to us, and there's no course out there, truth-telling course, 7 steps to telling the fucking truth. Like, shut up. Everybody, you know exactly where it's at, what you need to do. Get yourself a great relationship partner who's a mirror for you, because they'll likely highlight it directly or indirectly. But like, that is profound wisdom. And that's what I loved about this verse. And it can be taken in any way, shape, and form. You could use this for health too. It's like the person saying, what supplements do I need to take to get healthy? And you go, whoa, wrong question. How are you prioritizing movement, sleep, relationship, stress? Supplements need to be like the cherry on top if you're interested, even at that point. You're asking the wrong question. And so tell the truth, don't lie. How are you living in health?
I think of, just piggybacking on what you were saying, I can think back on 4 or 5 pivotal moments, pivotal events in my life where it was like I was at a crossroad and my life went in a better direction. Maybe it was our relationship, or maybe it was my health, or maybe career or family stuff. And the thing that was the impetus for my life getting better was for me to stop lying to myself about whatever the certain thing was. So that was like the impetus. That was the crux of the thing. In order for my life to get better, I have to stop lying to myself. And I can think back on a handful of things where I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that was when I stopped lying to myself about blank, and my life got amazingly better in this avenue. So I think that, like you said, babe, it may be uncomfortable in the short term, but it's only going to serve you in the long term. Even if your external circumstances don't change or get better, quote unquote, your inner world will be more peaceful. It will be more calm, because you know that you are aligned with reality and truth, and there will be no psychic weight attached to the energy that it takes to keep up lying to yourself.
Yeah, you get really sensitive. You get really sensitive to not telling the truth. Like, I'll lose a night of sleep if I fucking lied about something. Yeah, it's like can't even lie anymore. God.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so true. If you want to take this to another level, I think there's, and this gets into like very subtle energetics, but it feels to me as though there's a very subtle difference between telling the truth and not lying. And that's kind of what I've also picked up on. What, it says, Jesus said, do not lie and do not do what you hate.
Yeah.
And so I just, something about me says, okay, there's a reason he said that instead of be honest and do what you love. It seems to me as almost like figure out where you're lying and just stop doing that. Don't worry about telling the truth, but just stop lying. And I don't really know. And it's reminding me now of in 12 Rules for Life by Dr. Jordan Peterson. I think like number 1 rule is like, be honest, or at least don't lie. So I'm probably going to do a disservice to explaining it. You guys should check out that book as well. Yeah. So I don't know what exactly there is. I'd probably have to reread his book, but I know maybe I get into it in my book, but I don't really remember. But there's definitely an energetic difference between telling the truth, but just like focusing on not lying over focusing on telling the truth. And I'm not sure exactly what that is.
And it's probably, at least what comes up for me is that, God, everybody's got their truth, subjective, objective truth, and it gets dicey. And I think the reality is that truth sometimes is just a big, I don't know. I don't know what the truth is, but I do know what a lie is. And it's easier to not do that.
Yeah, I think the difference comes when, if somebody asks you a question, or if you think a particular thing about a certain person, maybe you're having a judgment about this person, like, oh God, they're so annoying. If you were to tell the truth in that moment, you're really annoying me right now. Like, is that helping? Is that helping anything? Is that, like, use wisdom, use discernment. Like, is this going to help the situation? If you just walk through life like Jim Carrey and Liar, Liar, your life is probably going to come crumbling down if you're, just speaking your mind without any sort of discernment or filter. But I think there's a difference between just saying whatever you want because it's truth and not lying. And that can probably be interpreted in a myriad of ways, but that's at least where my brain goes.
Yeah.
No, I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
Clayton, it's been a blast, man. Where can people get a hold of Revealing the Secret Teachings of Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas, this awesome work that you've put forth?
Yeah, the link should be below. If not, you can go to travelingtoconsciousness.com. If you guys are listening to this when it airs, my website is currently under construction, but there is a link there to find the link for Secret Teachings of Jesus. You can check out my Instagram, Clayton Cuteri, and then there's a link in the bio, or the Instagram Traveling to Consciousness, or my TikTok at Clayton Cuteri, or the YouTube page. There's a bunch of options to get there.
Yeah.
And even honestly, like, I am beyond excited of how well this book came out. But if people aren't at the point yet, I mean, it's less than $10. It's like $8.91. And it's, I take the tax on as well, so you don't even have to pay tax. But, do yourself a favor. At the very least, if $8.91 is out of your budget for the time being, get the actual gospel. Like, I break it down, but you can find the actual gospel out there. So do yourself a favor for sure, and at least read over it and be like, oh, this is a really fascinating book, and see how it applies to your life.
Yeah, that's great. We'll have all the corresponding links in the show notes for sure. As we close here, we got to ask you our last question that we ask every guest on The Medicine. The Medicine podcast is all about leaning into the medicines that help us to create more consciousness in our life, in every lane, in every relationship that we have. So for you, what currently feels like medicine right now?
Meditating, concentrated meditating, being very focused when in meditation. People think it's just closing your eyes and just floating away, but there's a level of concentration that needs to come into it. And I'm not exactly at a point to reveal because I signed a little document with Paramahansa's organization, so I'm not really able to disclose what I do personally, but there's a level of focus, and that level of focus will transcend into like your everyday life. So, focus on, one of those 10 elements, I would say, of what those manifestations of God, whichever one calls to you the most. For me, it was wisdom, but maybe for someone else, it's peace or calmness or love. Or I don't think love is actually a manifestation, which is interesting, but intelligence, calmness, peace, wisdom, light, vibration, and just feel into it. Because over time, I've noticed, like, the more I focus on one of them, the other ones just kind of started unfolding and coming to me. And at the end of the day, if you're attuned with the source and the creator of everything, that's all the medicine you really need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well put.
Well said.
Love it.
Thanks, my friend. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for being here, you guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. Check the show notes for all the links, and we will talk to you next time. Go spread some light. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed that, check out right over here for some more fun clips.
Oh, and you're going to want to subscribe.
Bye.